Today, messages to my younger investing self. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I've got a treat for you. I've got a whole bunch of folks from Nucleus Wealth. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a younger investor. Now, I'm so old I can't remember what that was like, so I really am going to pick some brains today. And to do that, I want to introduce you to three of the Nucleus Wealth crowd. They're going to introduce themselves. Eileen, first, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eileen, and I'm the Client Liaison Specialist at Nucleus Wealth. What I do is I handle a lot of client inquiries and make sure that clients are pushing through their accounts to Nucleus Wealth and having all their admin done as well, and supporting Shelley and the team in operations.
Very good. My name's Jaden. I'm the Marketing Officer here at Nucleus Wealth, and one area that I really help a lot on that's front-facing is putting together all the articles and sort of disseminating them on social media, that sort of thing, and producing our weekly podcast series, which, of course, Martin, you've appeared on several times at this point.
Just a bit.
A few times now. Shelley?
Thanks, Jaden. Hi, my name's Shelley George. I'm Head of Operations at Nucleus Wealth, and that basically means I'm responsible for all of the operations at Nucleus Wealth outside of the investment research ones. So trying to make sure that all of your needs get serviced when you come through and want to chat with us.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for spending some time today. Look, this is a really important conversation because I run household surveys, right? And I include in that a lot of younger households. And what I find is that there's some really interesting differences of opinion between younger households and older households with regard to finance, with regard to debt and all of those things. So what I wanted to do is to explore some of those intergenerational questions, because I think in the current environment, this is actually a really important question. And I thought maybe I would start with this and ask the question about where did you start learning about finance and money and those things, and to what extent did school help or not help, or was it later in your career when you started to actually think about these things? Shelley, can I come to you first?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's interesting. My first real experience of finance was the Asian financial crisis in '97. That obviously paints me as one of the older of my generation. And we were going on a trip overseas, and I couldn't understand why all of what was going on in Asia was causing problems for the Australian dollar. And I remember asking my mum about it, and definitely not getting a response that made any sense to me. And I think from there on, I was just curious about finances because it seemed that it really was something that made the world turn. It was so pivotal to so many parts of life. And it really drove studies later on at school and university. I ended up doing a Bachelor of Commerce because I was interested in that.
Right, but not really school. It was actually,
No, so I think at school, it was only ever that I decided to take up subjects in that area because I was already interested in it. So I think I did a commerce subject, and that was really interesting. But outside that, absolutely nothing.
Okay. Jaden, what about your experience?
Yeah, so for myself, definitely not school. School, I'd say, was categorically useless in that regard. Absolutely nothing in regards to teaching financial literacy. For me, when I first started to learn about or think about money was really through my parents. So when I was young, in primary school, sort of between the age of 7 to 10, my dad bought me a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which we sat down and read together. And that was really foundational in sort of teaching me basic spending habits and saving habits that really resonated with me.
Okay, and Eileen?
Mine was definitely from my dad, and I think it was due to our circumstances of living in a developing or Philippines third world country at the time. A lot of the mindsets of the people there, especially my dad, was to save for the rainy day. So nothing was learned at school. Everything was from my dad. And I only really got interested in the financial aspect of investing actually when I got into working with Nucleus Wealth. So yeah.
Now that's very interesting. And look, there's a very interesting common theme coming through there, which is that educationally speaking, the school system really doesn't give us a grounding in terms of finance and financial matters. And I find this in my survey. So even concepts like interest rate compounding, or what the effective annual rate for a mortgage would be, those things are never covered at school. And I find that absolutely astonishing, because what it basically means is you learn about these things either from your parents, if they are competent to be able to explain it, or you muddle along and make it up as you go along.
Absolutely, but thank goodness for YouTube these days. People, it's much easier, than 15 or 20 years ago, where you really actually couldn't access that information. So, there's that.
You've hit a really important question, which is going to be my next one. So where are those main sources of information now? You've touched on YouTube, and clearly social media is part of it. I guess, though, you should also add the caveat: not everything on social media is true, and so you have to know where to look and when to look, and cross-check.
How to verify.
Yeah. And what about Jaden and Eileen? Do you also look at YouTube and other social media channels to get information about this stuff as well?
At the moment, I am using a lot of Nucleus Wealth Insights to learn about how investments work in the world and how I can apply that to my personal life. And I think that's why I'm really interested in it, because I can actually apply it to my personal circumstances as well.
And Jaden?
Yeah, I would say much, of course, like Eileen, working in finance has definitely helped a lot in regards to just hearing things secondhand in the day-to-day. That helps a lot. But in the past, of course, I had to rely on sort of internet research, and then after that, of course, doing my due diligence. So I wouldn't just sort of take someone's word for it and go out and invest in something. It would be a matter of hearing about it, but then going out and making sure that I actually thoroughly understood it with some more supplementary research afterwards.
Okay, but the conclusion of that is that there are sources out there, but it's a bit of a crapshoot. If you hit some really good nuggets of information, then you can learn and make good decisions. But also, if you're not careful, you can actually end up going down rabbit holes and basically getting a bit misled by some of the stuff that's out there. So again, I would say to everybody, there's a lot of material there, but do actually kick the tires on it. Don't just swallow it all as gospel just because it's there. Or, by the way, if it's written in a book, or even if it's reported in the mainstream media, it doesn't always necessarily mean it gives you gives you the full story. Next question then. Debt. Is debt good? Is debt bad? Those people who've been through Australian university system probably has a debt off the back of it. But I also note in my surveys there's quite a bit of different attitude between younger households and older households. More older households are much more nervous about debt, but younger ones seem to be very happy to embrace it and use it. And that comes through from buy now, pay later, education debt, and all that sort of stuff, and mortgages and all those things. So, comfort levels on debt. Jaden, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. So personally, I'm not that comfortable with debt. I'll avoid it wherever possible. So, for example, I don't foresee myself ever having a credit card. I don't use Afterpay or anything like that. Wherever I can, I'll just be paying sort of cash in hand up front. Even with sort of larger purchases like buying a car, of course, if I was to buy a car brand new, that might not be an option. But if possible, I'd like to be able to purchase a car sort of outright, rather than taking out loans with that. But at the same time, I do see situations where debt is unavoidable, such as for a mortgage, or as you noted, sort of the HEX debt for university, that sort of thing. So where it's unavoidable, I'll accept it and sort of work on chipping away at it in the future, but avoiding it wherever possible for me personally.
Great. Shelley, what do you think?
I think I was brought up with this old school attitude of debt is bad. And even though I have done finance classes, which sort of sprout this idea of, if you're using debt in a smart way to, like increase productivity or that sort of thing to get a return on it, then it's good. It's good debt. And then bad debt is, debt that you're using to fund consumption and lifestyles. Even though I know that consciously, I think there's still a part of me that is ingrained that sort of would like to have financial freedom, so then I can make choices about my life, as opposed to, having to do something because I need to pay for things. So I think that's my attitude towards debt, and the way that I use it at the moment.
Eileen?
My personal opinion on debt is I try and avoid it at all costs. To me, it feels like I'm relying on another source to support my way of living or my income, and I like to be independent in that way and try and support myself. So at this point, if I was thinking of buying a house, it's probably not on the cards at all, or maybe ever. And part of it is also because I don't want to be grounded into one place. I want to be mobile and be able to spend my money freely elsewhere.
That's very interesting. And again, I see that in some of my surveys where there is that, flexibility, want to be more agile, don't want to have that debt noose around my neck sort of thing coming through quite often in the surveys. Although I do see many people eventually switch over and say, no, I need to get that mortgage. I need to try and get on the housing ladder, right? So let's take that to the next question. Is getting a mortgage and getting a house high on your list of priorities, or have you already got one, or, where are you on that journey?
At the moment, it's not a priority at all, but ask me in 10 years and I might change my mind.
Fair enough. Jaden?
Yeah, for me, it's very much in the back of my mind and something that I'm thinking about. Like, it's definitely going to be something that I want to work towards in the next sort of 10 years. And I do have sort of a nest egg sitting there that would likely, in the end, go towards a deposit on a house. However, at the same time, I do feel as though there's a big knowledge gap in that area. So I do feel as though that's an area where I need to focus on that first and really understanding what I'm getting into. There's also the outrageous prices at the moment. So wondering if that will ever sort itself out or not, or if it's better to avoid the FOMO and get in as soon as possible are really the factors playing in my mind.
Okay, and Shelley?
I actually have a mortgage, and for me, I think, like, even since I was in school, it was this in my head. I wanted to own a property. I love having a space that's my own, and that I can make my own. So I've done some renovations on my place, and it's just so important to me from that perspective. It's more of a lifestyle consumption decision than an investment decision, but it is a lot of money. So you kind of have to balance those out. I do. I'm kind of stuck because I really feel for people like Jaden and Eileen that can't really get into the property market, and they should be able to. They're both a few years into their careers, have good careers, and so that's really disappointing. And so I'm kind of conscious about that when it comes to political parties and that sort of thing. I don't want to support. I think there is a lot in Australia, and maybe I'm going on a tangent here, but of this mentality of I have a house, and so I want house prices to go up without thinking so much about the next generation. And so when I go to think about candidates and that sort of thing and parties, I do try to actually consider outside of myself when it comes to that sort of thing.
But you've highlighted a very interesting dilemma, right? Which is, once you've got a property, then your perspective changes, right? Because you actually would like the value to go up, because that means that you can actually see a bit of capital appreciation, right? Whereas if you are somebody trying to get in on the market, right, and the train is leaving the station, as Jaden said, what do you do? Do you try and jump on and quickly as you can, or do you actually say, never for me? And it's interesting that in my surveys, I'm actually seeing more people in their 20s and 30s saying, we don't think we're going to ever own a house, right? We'll probably always have to rent. And that has huge implications later in life, of course, as well. So, those decisions some often forced because of the way that the financial system has worked over the last 20, 30 years, is forcing people to make decisions they prefer not to make simply because of, there are very few alternative options. Let me go on then to the last discussion point, and that's saving versus investing. Do you see there's a difference? And for those who actually are in the process of beginning to think about building wealth, is investing and saving the same? Sheila, I'll come to you first because I think you've probably got a particular perspective on that.
So I think for me, I was lucky. So I've been in my place about 6 years, but just touching on this idea of the train leaving the station is that I'd actually tried a few times before I managed to buy and been unsuccessful because I'd been too price sensitive. And then finally the third time, probably was about 8 years overall, I was just like, okay, I want this. I'm just going to have to pay up. And I sort of, it was very scary that I did, but then down the track, other places sold around me and it seems like it's okay. But to your question, saving and investing, are they the same thing? I think I would look outside myself on to answer this point and say that in my work with Nucleus Wealth, I've definitely come across accountants and financial advisors that when they're speaking to young people that don't have a house, they are hearing that there is no interest in saving because you don't get any return on it with the current interest rates. And so people are looking for investment alternatives to help them build that deposit that they need to eventually get a house, hopefully without lender's mortgage insurance. I think that there's an opportunity for the investment product providers to help with solutions around there. And I'm going to spruik Nucleus Wealth because we have actually seen over our entire lifetime a number of clients use us to start to build that nest egg. Okay,
very interesting. And the concept of saving versus investing is to my mind, it's not totally the same, although they may come together, right? But people quite often get confused about the difference between the two. And sometimes it's about duration, sometimes it's about returns, all those things which may be different. Eileen, what about you? How do you see? Do you see the difference between saving and investing, or is it all part of the same thing?
Well, I wanted to ask you, Martin, actually, do you see putting contributions into super as saving or investing? Because that is my main strategy at the moment. I am just not confident in seeing a sum in my bank account, even if it's the savings account, knowing that that's tangible and I can access it at any time. So at the moment, my strategy is just putting it away. And when I retire, it'll all be there, hopefully.
Well, it's a good question. And look, to my mind, I think superannuation is more about investing. It should be more about investing than just saving, right? Because if you think about superannuation, you should be making some decisions about where that money's going. It shouldn't just be chucking it over the fence and let somebody look after it, right? You should have an active interest in which part of the investment market those funds are in, because of course, there may be some in cash, there may be some in international, there may be some in local, right? Now those are investing decisions, right? So it is absolutely more than saving. And to my mind, and again, I see it in the surveys, people often think about saving when they sort of chuck it into a bank account and say, well, I get, almost nothing on it now with that's at least it's there for a rainy day, right? Investing is perhaps where you tie the money up for a bit longer. You're happy to allow it to accumulate, but you have still to take an interest in it, right? And I think the big difference to me between investing and saving is, investing is you've got to be fairly proactive to make sure that you actually are in the right types of investments in the right wrappers, whether that's within superannuation or not. That's how I think about it. What do you think?
I definitely agree. And this is why I wish we were taught something similar in school, or even methods of investing. The first couple of years that I put my funds into my superannuation, I didn't know that my funds were being managed. I didn't know what industries they were being invested in. And only just recently, probably this year, I had a look and I actually contacted my superannuation to change the tactical strategy because I wanted to say, and I wanted to see the maximum growth, of course. So, yeah.
And just a question on that. Did you also ask questions about fees?
I did. I did, and I investigated as well.
Because that's the other thing that I would say, and message to everybody who's watching this: if you haven't asked questions about where your fees are going in your superannuation fund, you must, because the difference between paying 0.5% and 2% over 30 or 40 years is huge, absolutely huge.
I agree. And I feel like a lot of people don't actually know what questions to ask. So there's a lack of education or knowledge in there. And I hope people in our generation and younger become proactive to do this themselves.
Yeah, spot on. This is one of the reasons why I want to make the show, because there are some basic questions that I think people should ask. Jane, what about you? Saving, investing, is it the same? Is it different?
Yeah, I'd very much mirror your thoughts, Martin, in that there are some distinctions between the two. I view saving as sort of building a nest egg that isn't necessarily going to grow that much. It's just always going to be there and it's very safe. Whereas investing is something, it's going to be a little, you're taking on some risk there, but at the same time, you're expecting some growth. So I do think there's some distinctions. However, that being said, given our current age, given we've got sort of time on our side, and at the moment the returns on saving accounts are essentially zero, it does open the door to say perhaps that given we've got time on our side, investing should be a bigger part of where our money is going at the moment, as compared with sort of 20 years ago, where you could earn a bit of money on it, at least more than inflation, if it was sitting in a bank account.
Yes, well, today, of course, anything sitting in the bank account is being devalued in real terms. And people sometimes don't realise that has a huge impact as it compounds year over year. Terrific.
Martin,
yeah,
sorry,
go on.
before we jump in, can I just make one more point on this savings versus investment theme? And that's that you touched on it when you talked about the level of engagement is needed is higher if you're investing. And for me, I think we've touched on it, but haven't necessarily really nailed it or driven it home, is this idea that really investment carries more risk with it. And so like if I put on my finance 101 hat and thinking most of the savings you'll do will be through a major bank that's regulated by the government, and there might even be the government guarantee on it, so it's very, very safe. And then you go up to investments, and depending on what you're looking at, you're moving up the risk stream, and that's why you need to have that engagement with it, because you need to monitor that risk level. No. So I just kind of wanted to point out that snippet.
No, that's brilliant. And you literally took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to say it's very interesting that one of the things that I do see is, particularly among some younger investors, quote savers, right? They actually look at crypto and think, oh, that looks pretty good because we've had massive growth, right? But they don't sometimes understand the risk profile of that type of investing, right? And so I was going to touch exactly on the point you've made, that there is a risk gradient, right? And there's a basic law in finance, which is that the bigger the risk, the bigger the return, right? But the bigger the risk, the more chance you're going to lose your shirt, right? And it's a very important principle to understand. So, anchor it in some savings where you may not get a huge return, but at least you won't lose your shirt. But also just understand if you've got the risk curve. And, to my mind, cryptos would be at the sort of the more risky end of the spectrum, particularly because of their volatility and because nobody quite knows what their true value is.
Yeah, just on that, Martin, I think I would add that from what I can see, there's more of a willingness and an affinity to sort of stray towards these more volatile investments for people my age. And I think that part of that is it's almost been gamified in a way where suddenly you're jumping onto this app or whatever it might be, and you're taking out these positions that are sort of high risk, high return. And then there's this glorification of it as well on social media, where you see a huge amount of chatter about it. And I think that also it generates a real fear of missing out if you're not involved in it, where, people aren't posting their they're not posting their losses, they're only posting their wins. So, it can be difficult being on the outside looking in and seeing what's going on in that regard.
No, that's a very important point, and I was going to add to that as well that there's a difference between trading and investing, right? I think trading is where you're taking short-term positions and going up and down the curve and hopefully making money, but not necessarily. Investing generally would be longer term. And I think there's a difference of mentality. Again, in my surveys, I quite often see amongst younger people a confusion in their minds between trading and investing. And in fact, what they're actually doing is relatively short-term position taking. And just remember this, that for every position that you trade, that you win, there's a loser on the other side of the trade, right? It's always a net sum game. People forget that sometimes. So it's not necessarily going to be a natural win-win for everybody. Well, look, as we come to the end of this conversation, I want you to put your thinking cap on for a second and say, what would be the one message that you would say now to your younger self about finance, money, and investing? What would be the one piece of advice that you've learned now that you wish you'd known earlier on? Shelley, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd tell the younger me to, actually, you know what? I think it would be read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've only just read it a few months ago, and I think a lot of the lessons I sort of have intuited along the way, but it makes such a difference to just read them. And so for me to read that book, I think when I was much, much younger and, understand the lessons in that, that's what I'd say to myself.
Well, I actually interviewed the author of that some time ago on my channel, so I'm a great a fan as to some of the things that book highlights. Right? I don't say replicate it exactly, but it gets you to ask some very important questions, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Eileen, what about you? Message for your younger self?
Mine would definitely be ask more questions, be more curious, don't be intimidated by all the big words and numbers, and ask friends, ask family, because ultimately you're learning from your own environment and who you surround yourself with. And I think I could have learned a lot more if I just kept asking.
Yeah, very good point. I'd make a point to add to that, and that is there's a lot of jargon around, right? But actually, under the jargon, it's not that complicated, all right? There are many people wanting to make it sound really complicated. You must go and speak to all these people about, no, actually.
Because that's how they make money, right, Martin? Just to jump in there, this industry really gets off on making things way more complicated than they have to be.
Absolutely, and often not very transparent. So quite often you can't get the information that you need. Slight plug for Nucleus Wealth, because their systems are way more transparent than anybody else. One of the reasons why I've tied up with them through the World Fund. But so often it's confused and deliberately so. So you've got to strip it back to its fundamentals. And, I think that's a really important point. Jaden, let me come to you. What will be your message to your younger self?
My message to my younger self would be get in as early as possible, because the longer you're in the market, especially from a young age, it's just got longer and longer time frame for that compound interest to work and for it all to roll and really snowball up and up. So it would have been get a job younger, like a part-time job during high school, and start investing would have been my advice to my younger self.
And isn't compounding amazing, right? Anybody who's not thought through the interest on the interest on the interest, right? Build a little spreadsheet and just see how it builds over time. It is the most powerful element within investing or indeed saving. The longer you're in the market, the more chance you have of actually creating growth. Well, look, I want to say thank you very much to all three of you for sharing your thoughts and being very open and transparent about your personal situations. But I hope these have been important messages also for those younger people trying to tackle this really critical question, right? And my takeaways are education at school, terrible, could do a lot better than currently. Secondly, start young and learn and use all those different mechanisms we touched on. But the third one also is just be a little bit cautious. Don't swallow everything whole and ask some more questions, because the more questions that you ask, the more chance you are to be able to actually get to a good outcome. So I want to say thank you to Jaden, to Shelley, and to Eileen. I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll come back and have another chat on this. Maybe there are some other questions that we can explore, particularly because I'm very interested in the question of, what's it like to be, in this. Well, I'm sort of well over 60 now, so I've been through this, right? And I've seen a lot of change, but also the fundamental questions are actually still the same as they were even 20, 30, 40 years ago. So in a way that may be a positive thing, but it's also necessarily a word of warning too. So don't expect a sudden revolution necessarily. Thanks, folks. Really appreciate your time. And
Thanks, Martin.
we look forward to picking it up perhaps down the track.
Sounds good. Thanks, Martin.
Thanks. Bye.